In the dead of night, a 4-year-old girl clutched her newborn sister and ran barefoot through the cold grass, tears streaking her face as she whispered, "Daddy killed Mama, and now he's coming for us." But what neither of them knew was that their desperate escape would lead them straight into the arms of a man destined to change their fate. If this story already grips your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe and stay with us, because what happens next will restore your faith. John Baptiste was checking on the cattle in the furthest pasture of the ranch when he heard a faint crying coming from deep within the brush, a sound he couldn't place, but one that made his seasoned heart beat faster. At 52, widowed for nearly a decade, he'd learned to pay attention to the signals life sent, especially those that came at midnight, like omens of sorrow. He let his horse graze and quietly made his way toward the sound, stepping carefully through the tall, wild grass growing along the edge of the property. What he found hidden in the brush made him run in a way he hadn't in years. A tiny girl no more than 4 sat on the ground like a ghost, holding a bundle of rags that moved and whimpered softly. Her bare feet were torn by rocks and thorns, her cotton dress ripped and stained with dirt and dried blood. But it was her eyes that broke John's heart in 2 wide, terrified eyes that had witnessed things no child ever should. "Sweetheart, for the love of God, what are you doing out here all alone?" he asked, crouching down to her level, his voice gentle, like the one he used to calm nervous foals. The girl stared at him for what felt like forever, as if weighing whether she could trust this big man with the gray beard and kind eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper sharp enough to cut through the night. "My daddy killed my mommy because he had another woman," she said. "He said he's gonna kill both of us too. Please, sir, help us before he gets here." John felt the world spin around him like a whirlwind. He scooped the girl into his arms, cradling her along with the baby she held, feeling them both shiver from the cold and the fear. Climbing onto his horse with the 2 children, he rode hard toward the main house as if the devil himself were chasing him. Zeke Joel shouted John as he burst onto the property, waking the ranch hands who were still asleep in the workers' quarters. "Get up now. We've got an emergency on our hands." Zeke was the first to appear, a tall, broad-shouldered black man who had once been enslaved on the land and now worked for wages after emancipation. Joel followed close behind, a loyal man of mixed heritage who knew every inch of land across the region. "What's going on, boss?" Zeke asked, his eyes widening as he saw the 2 little girls clinging to John. "They ran from home," John answered, his voice grave. "Their father killed their mother and he's coming after them next. We're going to keep them safe here. Then we're going after that bastard." That cold morning, while John wrapped those 2 girls in blankets like they were his own flesh and blood, he had no idea he was stepping into a path that would alter his life forever. And if you already feel this story tightening around your heart, stay with us, because what lies ahead will show just how far a good man is willing to go to protect the innocent. The sun hadn't yet risen when John, Zeke, and Joel gathered in the kitchen of the main house. The 2 girls had fallen asleep in each other's arms on a makeshift bed of quilts and cushions that John had laid out with the tenderness of a man caring for orphaned souls. The older one, her name was Rosie, had tearfully shared what was easily the most horrific tale John had heard in all his 52 years. Their father, Anthony Ferreira, was a violent man who had always demanded a son to help with the farm work. When their mother gave birth to another girl, he flew into a rage that lasted 3 days. He hit Mama so bad she couldn't even get up. Rosie choked out. He said she was useless, said all she could do was make girls. Then he grabbed the hoe, and Rosie couldn't finish. She didn't have to. All 3 men knew exactly how that sentence ended. "Sweet Lord in heaven," Joel murmured, crossing himself. What kind of devil does something like that? Rage surged through John's chest, stronger than anything he'd felt. Not even when yellow fever had taken his wife had he felt something this fierce. But alongside that fury came a cold, clear resolve. "Where exactly did you live, sweetheart?" he asked gently. "In the house by the clear river on the far side of the woods," she replied. Daddy said he was going to find the sheriff and tell him Mama ran off with another man. But before that, he was coming back to do to us what he did to her. Zeke clenched his fists so tight the knuckles turned white. Boss, we can't let this happen. That man's a monster, not a man. It's not going to happen, John said with a firmness that ended the conversation right there. First, we make sure these girls are safe. Then we go after him. He called for Bernice, the woman who ran the kitchen and had a special way with kids. She was a black mother of 5 herself, and when John explained the situation, she took the 2 little girls into her arms, like they were her own. You can count on me, Mr. John, she said softly. These little angels will be under my watch. No one's gonna lay a finger on them while I'm breathing. For the rest of the day, John turned the ranch into a fortress. He positioned his men at key locations across the land, sent word to neighbors about what was going on, and prepared weapons in case things turned violent. If Anthony Ferreira ever showed up looking for his daughters, he'd find far more resistance than he'd bargained for. But there was something else stirring in the mind of the ranch owner, a different kind of plan, one rooted in justice, though not the sort that waited around for the sluggish gears of the legal system to turn. Sometimes John thought watching Rosie try to feed mashed corn to her baby sister Justice from decent men had to come faster than any verdict passed down from a courtroom. Joel, he called as the sun was dipping low. You know those Clear River backwoods pretty well, don't you? Like the lines on my hand, sir. Used to hunt through those hills all the time when I was young. Then tomorrow at first light we're going to ride out that way. Let's see if we can pick up any trace of Anthony. That night, while the girls slept soundly inside the big house guarded by ranch hands stationed around the property, John stood at the window staring up at the stars and making a silent vow. He would do everything in his power to find the mother of those girls, whether she was still breathing or not, and he would see to it that justice was served one way or another. What would you have done in John's place? Would you wait for the law to catch up or take justice into your own hands? Share your thoughts in the comments. As dawn broke, John, Zeke, and Joel were already saddling the horses in the ranch yard, armed and determined like men on a sacred mission. The girls were still asleep, safe under Benedita's watchful care. She had sworn not to take her eyes off them for even a second. Before leaving, John knelt beside the bed where Rosie rested, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. She jolted awake like someone used to being on high alert. Rosie, sweetheart, he said softly. Uncle John has to step out for a while to take care of something. You stay here with Aunt Benedita and look after your little sister, all right? No one's going to hurt you while I'm still breathing. The little girl grabbed his arm with surprising strength for someone so small. You're going after my dad, aren't you? Please, don't let him find me. He said he'd make us disappear like he did with Mama. That's not going to happen, sweetheart. You can trust Uncle John. The 3 men rode out toward the forest that separated the ranch from the Clear River region, following the directions Rosie had shared the night before. It was a 2-hour ride along little-known trails, winding paths Joel had memorized in his younger hunting days. Boss Zeke said as they moved through the brush, "What are we going to do if we find him?" John paused, thinking carefully before answering. First, we look for the girl's mother. If she's already gone, we'll bring her body back to give her a proper Christian burial. But if he's keeping her somewhere... He trailed off. And if he fights back? Zeke asked. Zeke, I once took down a jaguar to protect my cattle. If I have to kill a rabid animal to save a child, I won't hesitate. They reached the area Rosie had described around midday, just as the sun was beating down hard and the heat began to settle in. It was a remote region scattered with a few houses tucked between thick woods and the river places where people lived far from the eyes of society. The first house they came across had clearly been abandoned for some time, the adobe walls crumbling, weeds creeping through the doorway. But there were fresh signs of recent activity, footprints in the mud, smoldering ashes from a fire, and markings on a nearby tree showing where a horse had been tied. Someone's been here not long ago, Joel said, examining the tracks like a seasoned scout. That's when they heard it. The faintest moan, almost too quiet to catch, coming from inside the ruined house. A sound of pain and desperation that made the three men exchange looks, filled with equal parts hope and dread. John raised a hand to signal silence and moved toward the doorway, shotgun in hand. What he saw inside filled him with a righteous fury that burned like hellfire. A woman was tied up in the darkest corner of the room, her body covered in visible wounds, her clothes torn and dirty. She was alive, but so weak she couldn't even lift her head when John's silhouette filled the doorway. "Please," she murmured, her voice raw and broken. "Don't hurt me anymore. I swear I won't tell anyone." "Easy now, ma'am. We came here to find you. Your daughters are safe back at my ranch." It was like a flicker of life reignited behind her bruised eyes. "Rosie, the baby. They got away." "They did," John reassured her. "And they're being looked after. You're safe now too. Let's get you out of here." As John gently untied the woman and wrapped her in his own shirt, Zeke and Joel stood guard outside, fully aware that Anthony could return at any moment. Sometimes a single decision can alter the course of an entire family's life, and what John found in that shack shifted everything. Stick with us to see how it all unfolds. The woman who said her name was Isabel could barely stay on her feet when John helped her out of the decaying house. 3 weeks of captivity and abuse had left her body battered and her spirit hanging by a thread, but the news that her daughters were alive and protected gave her a strength she hadn't felt in years. "He told me they were dead," Isabel whispered, leaning heavily on John's arm. "Said they cried a lot before he... God almighty, how did I believe such evil?" "Your older girl's sharp like her mama," John said with warmth in his voice. When she realized what her daddy was planning, she grabbed the baby and ran. "She showed up at my ranch just before noon, bruised and shaken but alive." Zeke had readied a makeshift bed in the wagon they'd brought, lining it with clean blankets. Isabel was far too weak to ride, and even the smallest movement made her wince in pain. "Boss," Joel whispered, pointing toward a narrow path in the trees. "Someone's coming, and they're moving fast." The sound of hooves pounded louder along the tight forest road. John motioned for Zeke to stay back and protect Isabel in the wagon, while he and Joel took cover behind the thickest trees. Anthony rode into the clearing on a wiry, sweat-soaked horse, a rugged man with cruelty etched into every line of his face. When he spotted the wagon and realized Isabel was being taken away, he jumped down and drew a gleaming knife from his belt. "Who the hell thinks they can take what belongs to me?" he bellowed, his voice slurred with liquor. "That woman's my lawful wife. No one's got the right to drag her off." John stepped out from behind the tree, his rifle aimed squarely at Anthony's chest. "She doesn't belong to anyone you sorry excuse for a man, least of all someone who beats his wife and leaves a little girl to die alone." At the mention of the children, Anthony's expression shifted into something wild cornered. "Where are they? Where are my girls?" "Far from you," John replied coolly. "Right where they'll stay until you pay for what you've done." Anthony let out a laugh that had no humor in it, just a twisted echo that bounced through the trees. "Crime. You think I committed a crime? I'm raising my family the way my father taught me. A woman who won't obey gets the belt until she does, and a kid that talks back. Same damn thing. Those girls worthless. I needed a boy to help me in the fields, and this useless woman gave me nothing but mouths to feed that give nothing in return." And then in that moment, Isabel, summoning every last ounce of strength buried deep within her, rose from the wagon and screamed with a voice that came from the very depths of her soul. "You monster! How can you talk about your own daughters like that? They're angels, and you're the devil himself." Antonio charged toward the wagon with his machete raised, but he underestimated Zeke's aim. The shotgun blast hit him square in the right leg, knocking him to the ground with a howl of pain and rage. "You're under arrest, Anthony Ferreira," John declared, his voice unwavering. "We're taking you to town to the sheriff's office, and you're going to face charges for attempted murder, unlawful captivity, and abuse." Joel tied the wounded man tightly with thick rope, while Anthony cursed and spat threats of revenge, but his words carried no weight, echoing like empty wind through dry leaves. Isabel cried softly from the wagon, not out of pain, but because she could finally breathe without fear. For the first time in 3 weeks, she felt a sense of peace. Do you believe there are still people in this world willing to risk their lives to protect others? John proved they exist. Subscribe to the channel to see how this story of courage unfolds to the very end. The journey back to the ranch was slow and tense. Isabel rode in the wagon, still far too weak to move on her own, but visibly relieved to finally be free from captivity. Anthony was tied to his own horse, his wounded leg wrapped in cloth to stop the bleeding, grumbling threats that no one paid attention to anymore. John walked beside the wagon, watching Isabel with the care of someone who looked after family. She couldn't have been more than 25, yet the abuse had aged her beyond her years. Still, whenever she spoke of her daughters, her eyes lit up with a glow untouched by all the pain she had endured. "How did you survive all this?" John asked gently. "By thinking about my girls," Isabel replied, her voice faint, but full of quiet strength. "Every time he hit me, I pictured Rosie's little face calling me Mama. Every time I thought I might die, I reminded myself the baby still needed me to grow up strong. And now, what are you planning to do?" John asked. Isabel stayed silent for a long while, as if trying to sort through thoughts she hadn't been able to think clearly in weeks. "I don't know, Mr. John. I've got no home, no family, nothing left but my daughters. And after everything that's happened, I'm terrified he'll find some way to come back and do something even worse." "That won't happen," John said firmly. "Not while I'm still breathing." When they arrived back at the ranch late that afternoon, Benedita came rushing from the big house carrying Rosie in her arms and the baby wrapped tightly in clean cloth. The reunion between mother and daughters was enough to break the hardest heart tears of joy, desperate embraces, and whispered words of love through sobs. "Mama, Mama, I thought you were dead," cried Rosie, clinging to Isabel's neck like she'd never let go again. "I'm right here, my flower. Mama's here, and I'm never going to leave you again." John watched the moment unfold with a quiet, bittersweet smile. It had been 10 long years since his home had seen that kind of joy. Not since Maria das Dores had passed had the ranch felt the kind of warmth and happiness only women and children could bring into a home. Zeke, the rancher, called out tomorrow at first light. "I want you to take Anthony into town and turn him over to the sheriff. Tell him everything that happened just the way it was. Make sure he's held accountable for the crimes he's committed." "Yes, sir. And what if he tries something on the way? If he does, you do whatever it takes to keep that family safe. They've been through enough already." That night, while Isabel tucked her daughters into real beds for the first time in weeks, John sat quietly on the porch of the big house, puffing on his pipe and reflecting on the strange turns life could take. At 52, he'd made peace with the idea of living the rest of his life alone. But now, watching this brave woman care for her children with such tenderness, he felt something stir in his chest that he thought had died a long time ago. Mr. John Isabel appeared at the doorway, wrapped in a shawl Benedita had lent her. "Can I speak with you?" "Of course, Miss Isabel. Come have a seat." I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for us. You saved our lives and you didn't even know who we were. I just did what any decent Christian would do, Miss Isabel." "No, you didn't. Plenty of people would have slammed the door and pretended they didn't see a thing. You risked your own life to protect us." John looked at this woman who had endured hell and somehow still found a way to smile when she looked at her children. There was a strength in her he deeply respected, a quiet resilience that moved him. "Miss Isabel," he said after a long pause, "you and the girls can stay here as long as you need. This house is far too big for one man alone. Sometimes life brings people into our path who change everything. Could it be that John and Isabel were meant to become a family? Let us know what you think, and keep following the story." The days that followed brought a sense of peace John hadn't felt in years. The ranch, once filled only with the sounds of work and the silence of solitude, now echoed with children's laughter and warm conversation during meals. Isabel recovered quickly, and her presence breathed new life into every corner of the home. Rosie had grown deeply attached to John, trusting him completely with the pure confidence only children give to those who truly protect them. She called him Uncle John and followed him through the fields full of questions about the horses, the cattle, and everything else her curious eyes could see. The baby, now named Mary in honor of John's late wife, was thriving under the care of Isabel and Benedita. Uncle John Rosie said one hot afternoon as she sat on the porch, shucking corn, "Will you let us live here forever?" John, who was working with a rope nearby, paused and looked at her with warmth in his eyes. "What do you think, little one? Would you like to stay?" "Yes, I would. No one hits us here. There's food every day. Mama doesn't cry anymore. And you're the kindest man I've ever met." Isabel, who was rocking baby Mary gently while nursing her, smiled at her daughter's words. Over the past few days, she had watched John care for her children like they were his own, and it stirred feelings in her that she had long believed were gone forever. "Rosie, don't go bothering Mr. John with questions like that," she said softly. "It's no bother at all, Miss Isabel," John replied. "Truth is, I should be asking whether you feel comfortable staying here with an old loner like me." "You're not old," Isabel said with a shy blush, "and after everything we've been through, it would be an honor for any woman to be beside a man like you." It was the first time they'd ever touched on the subject, and both felt the weight of unspoken feelings settle in the quiet air around them. John had become more than just a protector. He was now a constant, gentle, and caring presence that Isabel never imagined could exist in a man. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep, Isabel and John sat together on the porch beneath the stars, talking softly. They shared pieces of their past old dreams they'd given up on, and new hopes they hadn't dared to speak aloud until now. Miss Isabel, John said, after a long pause, "I know you've been through more than anyone should ever have to endure, and maybe it's too soon to be saying something like this. Please speak, Mr. John. After all we've lived through, there's no reason to be afraid of words anymore." "I've gotten used to having you all here," he said quietly. "More than I probably should have. This house used to be empty and cold, and now it feels like a home again." Isabel felt her heart race. "It's the same for us, Mr. John. For the first time in my life, I feel safe. I feel cared for. Then, would you ever consider the idea of, well, making this permanent, of marrying me and letting me be a real father to those girls?" The tears that spilled down Isabel's face weren't from sorrow, but from a joy she thought she'd never feel again. "Are you sure, Mr. John? It's 2 little girls, a lot of work, a lot of responsibility. Miss Isabel, I've raised wild cattle and broken stubborn horses. I think I can handle 2 well-behaved girls and a woman worth more than all the gold in the world." When Isabel said yes under that star-filled sky, she wasn't just agreeing to marriage, she was accepting a chance to rebuild her life beside a man who had proven not through words, but through action, that true love exists, and that some people are born to protect others. Stories like this remind us that sometimes love appears when we least expect it. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone else who still believes in the power of goodness. 3 months after the rescue, the news everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. Anthony would stand trial in town. The sheriff had conducted a thorough investigation gathering witness statements and enough evidence to bring him to court on charges of attempted murder, unlawful imprisonment, and abuse. John and Isabel made the trip into town with Zeke and Joel, who were prepared to testify about what they had witnessed. The girls stayed back at the ranch under the devoted care of Benedita, who protected them with the fierce love of a mother hen guarding her chicks. The courthouse was packed when they arrived. Word had spread across the region, and people came from miles around to witness the trial of the man who tried to kill his own family. Isabel trembled slightly as she stepped into the courtroom, but John's steady hand on her arm gave her the strength she needed. Anthony looked thinner, unshaven, but the cruelty in his eyes hadn't faded one bit. When he saw Isabel walk in, he muttered just loud enough for everyone to hear, "That wretch should have died with those worthless brats." The judge banged his gavel to restore order. The public prosecutor, a young but experienced man, presented the evidence clearly, the bruises and scars on Isabel's body, Rosie's closed-door testimony, and the sworn accounts of the men who had found Isabel tied up and bleeding in the abandoned house. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor said with conviction, "this is not just a case of domestic violence. This is a premeditated attempt to murder a mother and her 2 young daughters, a crime that cries out for justice." The defense attorney hired by Anthony's family tried to argue that this was a cultural issue, that the man had the right to discipline his family however he saw fit. But his arguments rang hollow in the face of the evidence and the raw emotional testimonies. When Isabel took the stand, her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger as she told her truth. She described 3 years of marriage filled with escalating violence, the despair she felt after their second daughter was born, and the terror of the 3 weeks she spent imprisoned. "I've lost many things," she said, looking directly at the jury, "but when he threatened to kill my daughters just because they were girls, I knew I was standing in front of a monster, not a man." John testified about the condition in which he found the girls and Isabel about the rescue, and about Anthony's own confession when he was taken into custody. His words carried weight in the region. Everyone knew him as an honest, hard-working man. When it was Anthony's turn to speak in his own defense, he stood up with arrogance and said things that horrified even the relatives who had come to support him in court. "All I ever wanted was a son to help me work. These women do nothing but make trouble and waste money. If I really wanted to kill them, I would have done it already. I was just teaching them to respect me." The silence that followed was heavy as iron. Even the judge, a seasoned man who had heard his share of difficult cases, looked visibly shaken. The jury's decision was unanimous, guilty on all counts. The sentence was harsh, 20 years of hard labor with no right to receive visits from the family he tried to destroy. As he handed down the sentence, the judge spoke words that echoed through the courtroom. "Anthony Ferreira, you are not only guilty of the crimes committed against your wife and daughters, you are guilty of crimes against human decency itself. You've been condemned by the law of man, and may God have mercy on your soul." As they exited the courthouse, Isabel cried, but these were tears of release. At long last, the nightmare had officially come to an end. Do you believe justice always finds its way even when it takes time? Sometimes we must be patient to see evil held accountable. Share your thoughts in the comments. 2 months after the trial, on a bright Sunday morning, the little church in town filled with people eager to witness the most talked-about wedding in the region. Isabel, wearing a simple yet graceful white dress, lovingly sewn by the women of the community, walked toward the altar where John stood waiting with a smile that lit up his entire face. Rosie led the way, proudly scattering rose petals as the flower girl in her mother's wedding. Little Mary, now 4 months old and chubby as a cherub, slept soundly in Benedita's arms, who couldn't stop beaming with joy. Father Anthony, who had known John since he was a boy, officiated the ceremony with heartfelt warmth. He spoke about how God sometimes allows us to pass through storms so we can truly appreciate the sunshine, and how real love isn't found in fancy words, but in actions filled with protection and care. John the priest asked at the moment of vows, "Do you take Isabel as your lawful wife to love and protect her in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health for the rest of your days?" "I do, Father. And I also take her daughters as my own to raise them with love and give them everything a child needs to grow up happy." Isabel, do you take John as your lawful husband to love and honor him in happiness and in hardship, in good health and in illness for all the days to come? "I do, Father. And I promise to be a good wife and to make our home a place filled with peace and joy." When the priest finally said, "You may kiss the bride," the entire church broke into applause. Zeke wept openly, saying it was the first time in 10 years he'd seen the boss truly happy. Joel hollered and shouted cheers like he was at a summer fair. The celebration took place back at the ranch, right on the land where everything had begun on that cold morning when Rosie showed up holding her baby sister and begging for help. Benedita had prepared a feast with every delicious thing she could make: roast pig farmhouse chicken, homemade sweets, fruit liqueurs, and a special bottle of cachaça that John had been saving for a day that really mattered. "Now you've got a real dad," Isabel whispered to Rosie as the little girl munched on a generous slice of cornmeal cake. "A dad who's going to love you with all his heart." "I always knew Uncle John would be our dad," Rosie replied with the simple wisdom only children have. "From the first day he looked at us the way a real dad looks at his kids." John, overhearing the exchange, walked over and scooped Rosie into his arms. "Now we're a real family, sweetheart. You little Mary, your mama and me, and no one's ever going to pull us apart again." That night, after the guests had gone and the girls were fast asleep, Isabel and John sat together on the porch of the big house, now truly a home filled with life and love. "Are you sure you won't regret this?" Isabel asked softly, still carrying the hesitation born from years of hurt. "Two little girls are a lot of work." John wrapped his arms around her firmly. "I spent 10 years in this house alone with nothing but chores and silence. Now I wake up every day with a reason to protect and love the family I didn't know I was waiting for. How could I regret the greatest blessing of my life?" Above them, the stars shimmered brighter than ever, as if the heavens themselves were celebrating the beginning of a new family, built on love, respect, and mutual care. What do you feel when you see a story of pain turn into one of joy? Sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones we choose to build with love. Share your thoughts in the comments if you believe in the power of true love to heal. The years that followed brought a peaceful, steady happiness to John's ranch. Rosie grew up strong and capable, helping with the household chores and learning to read and write, thanks to the teacher John hired to visit twice a week. The girl had a natural gift with animals and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian one day. Mary, now 3 years old, filled the home with laughter and energy, her giggles echoing down the hallways. She had called John Dad from the moment she could speak, and every time he heard it, his heart melted all over again. Isabel had blossomed into a confident, radiant woman. The physical scars left by her past had long faded, but more importantly, the deeper wounds of her soul were slowly healing day by day within the loving, safe home John had built for them. "Daddy, tell me the story about how you rescued Mommy from the bad man," Rosie would ask on cold winter nights when the family gathered near the fireplace. John would always retell the story as a gentle adventure where good triumphed over evil, leaving out the darker parts the girls didn't need to carry. To them, it was simply the tale of how their parents first met. Isabel had since given birth to 2 more children. First came John Jr., a sturdy boy who looked just like his father, and then little Anna Claire, a green-eyed girl who was her mother's mirror image. The house was always alive with the noise only a big family can bring. Laughter, cries, running feet, and that beautiful kind of chaos that makes a home truly feel alive. "Sometimes I still think this must all be a dream," Isabel confessed to John one evening, as they rocked Anna Claire back to sleep after she'd woken up thirsty. "After everything I went through having this life, this peace, this family, it just feels too good to be real." "It's not a dream, my love," John said gently. "It's God's reward for someone who's been through more pain than they ever deserved and still found the strength to keep going." Rosie, now 10 years old, had grown into the perfect big sister, always caring for the younger ones with patience and affection. When someone asked her about her biological father, she would answer simply, "My dad is John Baptiste. He always has been." The whole region came to know and respect their family. John became a symbol of honesty and integrity, always the first to lend a hand when a neighbor needed help. His ranch flourished not just because he was a capable man, but because the place carried a kind of goodness, a quiet power born from the fact that in that home, love had finally conquered hate. One day, a mule driver brought word from the city, Anthony had died in prison during a violent altercation with other inmates. Isabel received the news with quiet composure. "I don't feel happy or sad," she told John. "All I feel is that a dark chapter of my life has finally closed for good. Now I can look ahead without fear." That evening, after putting the girls to bed, Isabel and John walked slowly across the ranch land where everything had started 7 years earlier. It was the very same spot where little Rosie had shown up holding baby Mary in her arms, terrified and desperate. "Have you ever thought," Isabel said softly, "that if we hadn't crossed paths that night, our lives would have turned out completely different? I think about it all the time," John replied, wrapping his arm around his wife. "And every time I thank God for guiding you here. You saved me just as much as I saved you." The full moon cast its glow across the land, lighting up the peaceful pastures where the cattle now rested, the big house where a happy family slept soundly, and the same stretch of earth where one cold morning years ago, a miracle had begun to unfold. Are some meetings destined to happen? Stories like this make us believe they are. If this story moved you this far, don't stop now. Stay with us to the very end. 20 years had passed since that life-changing morning. John, now 72 but still strong and sharp, sat out on the porch of the big house watching the flurry of life around the yard. It was Sunday, the day when the entire family came together for the traditional lunch Isabel always prepared with the help of her daughters. Rosie, now 24, had married a kind man from the neighboring town and worked as a teacher at the local school. Mary, now 23, had become a nurse and dedicated her life to caring for those in need, especially women who had survived domestic abuse, a mission she often said was her way of honoring her mother's story. 17-year-old John Jr. had grown tall and strong like his adoptive father and had chosen to stay and run the ranch alongside him. 15-year-old Anna Claire was a bright, determined girl who dreamed of becoming a lawyer to stand up for the vulnerable, just as she always said. The yard was full of grandkids darting from one end to the other, laughing, chasing chickens, and filling the air with the joyful chaos only children can bring. Rosie had brought along her 3 little ones, and Mary was expecting her first child. Grandpa John shouted the youngest of the grandchildren, a 4-year-old girl who looked exactly like Rosie had at that age. "Tell us the story about how you rescued Grandma Isabel." John smiled and scooped the little one into his arms. It was a story he'd told 100 times, and yet he never tired of telling it. For the grandchildren, it was simply a fairy tale adventure where the hero saved the princess. They didn't need to know the darker truths. It was a freezing night. He began, his voice slow and steady, like someone savoring each word. And then, out of the darkness, came a brave little girl carrying her baby sister. Isabel, now 45 and still beautiful, despite the silver threads starting to show in her hair, paused from stirring the pot in the kitchen just to listen. Even after all these years, Isabel still felt moved every time she heard John retell that story. Benedita, now well into her old age but still sharp and full of energy, helped prepare lunch while muttering joyfully to herself, "I've never seen a home more blessed than this one." So much laughter and kids running wild everywhere. After the meal, as the younger ones settled down for their afternoon naps and the adults chatted on the porch, Rosie walked up to John with an envelope in her hand. "Dad," she said. She had never once stopped calling him that. "This came for you. It's from the school where I work. They want to honor you as Citizen of the Year for everything you've done for the community." John shook his head with a soft smile. "Sweetheart, I only did what any decent man would have done. You don't need to give someone an award for that." "Yes, we do, Dad," Rosie replied. "You saved our family, and then you spent your whole life helping others. How many people have stayed here when they needed shelter? How many times did you lend money without ever charging interest? How many early mornings did you get up to help a neighbor in need?" Isabel stepped up beside him and gently took his hand. "John, accept it. Let people see that men like you still exist in this world." That afternoon, with the sky painted in shades of orange and pink, John Baptiste walked alone down to the edge of the ranch, to the very spot where it had all begun. It was part of his daily ritual to stand in that place and thank God for the family he had found and the life they had built together. He looked out toward the dirt road that led to town and remembered the day he took Anthony in to face justice. He recalled the broken woman he had rescued from that abandoned house. He remembered the two frightened little girls who had run into his arms seeking safety. And now he saw the outcome of it all. A big, joyful family. Children raised with love. Grandkids playing freely in the yard. A wife who had bloomed like a rose after the storm. He had turned tragedy into a blessing, pain into peace, and fear into a feeling of home. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered, looking up at the darkening sky for giving me the chance to be a father, a grandfather, and a protector. For showing me that family isn't just blood, it's love, it's care, it's sacrifice. The stars began to appear, the same stars that had lit up the sky that very first night when two desperate girls stumbled upon a man who was willing to risk everything to protect them. And right there on the land where the miracle had begun, John smiled with quiet certainty, knowing that he had fulfilled his purpose in this world, to prove that love can always defeat hate, that goodness will always rise above cruelty, and that some people are born to save others. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe that good people still exist, subscribe to the channel. Here, every story is born from the soul of our people, and there's always another one waiting for you.